Tristan, the child of sadness, the Knight of Lamentation, and a guy who is very open about his feelings. By looking at his class, design, skill set, backstory, and characterization, how well does Tristan in the Fate franchise compare to his mythical counterpart? And what grade would I give his depiction? Let's find out, shall we? Tristan is an archer class servant, which is a good choice, but it's not the only option for him. Because while Tristan was known as a superb user of the bow, he was at least just as good with a sword, being able to fight Lancelot to a draw, which is kind of a big deal. And despite being an archer, they do have him wear a sword in all of his ascension forms. So Tristan could have gone either way. So why archer? My guess is that it has to do with the other round table knights we have. Let's see, Arthurian? Saber, Lancer, Ruler, okay, she's a lot of things. Mordred? Saber. Lancelot? Saber and Berserker. Gawain? Saber. Bedivere? Saber. The only ones who aren't a damn saber are Gareth, Percival, and possibly Agravain. So in the light of just how many sabers there are among the round table knights, and how many of them don't really have any other options, Tristan being a capable archer gave the devs a chance to have something different, especially among our early roster of round table servants. Getting into his character design, Tristan is kind of a reverse Medea in the sense that the further up his ascensions you go, the more clothes he puts on. For his first ascension, you get Tristan in something that, while perhaps not casual, is at least the most relaxed set of clothing he has, not counting his summer costume obviously. Notably, his bow here is actually normal, and he's also wearing a small skirt reminiscent of what you see on Bedivere. Actually, that's a recurring theme here. Tristan takes elements from other round table knights and adds them to his outfits. The illustrator even says that she designed Tristan with the other round table knights in mind, to make him fit in with the others. The most notable thing about his first ascension though is the big scar upon his chest. That's actually a scar from how he was killed in the legends. The exact circumstances vary, but Tristan ends up getting killed by a poisoned spear, hence the purple color. Moving to his second ascension, Tristan puts on some plate armor, gets a cape, and now his bow is that bow-harp hybrid thing. I'll talk more about that later. For his third ascension, Tristan trades his previous cape out for another that reminds me of the one Gawain wears, perhaps to symbolize Tristan becoming a Knight of the Round Table. We are talking about a year 1 servant here, so the designs tend to be more simple than later ones. With that said, much like with Gawain, simple doesn't necessarily mean bad. I'd say that Tristan has a good design, showcasing the fact that he is not only an archer, but also a knight who is able to fight with the best of the Round Table. Moving into his skill set, Tristan's first skill is Harp of Healing, which becomes Resounding Declaration of Love after an upgrade. Tristan was not only an archer, but also a musician who played the harp. It's why his bow is this weird but unique combination of a bow and a harp, though this exact weapon is an invention of the Fate franchise, since neither bows nor harps work like that. It's still a cool idea though that highlights 2 of the skills Tristan is known for. Tristan playing the harp, however, is directly connected to his death in the prose Tristan, where he is killed by his uncle King Mark with a poisoned spear while playing the harp for Isolde, only for Isolde to die as well. This is only one version of how Tristan dies in the legends, and it is not the one Fate chooses to follow. We will talk about that one soon enough. As for the skill's name, this is actually a generic-ish skill since it is shared with David, and the name Harp of Healing is a much better fit for David than it is for Tristan, which is probably why the devs decided to upgrade this skill and rename it Resounding Declaration of Love instead, referring to the romance between Tristan and Isolde. Tristan's second skill is Unblessed Birth, referring to the tragic circumstances of his birth. Normally I'd talk about this in the backstory section, but here we go. Tristan is the son of Melodius and Elizabeth, the king and queen of Lyonesse respectively, a fictional kingdom said to be off the coast of Cornwall, but which later sunk beneath the waves like Atlantis. Depending upon the version, Melodius was either abducted by a fairy or through some other magical means, and Elizabeth, trying to find her husband in a forest, ended up dying while giving birth to Tristan. Indeed, she named him Tristan, which comes from the Latin word tristis, meaning sadness or melancholy. No wonder the guy is always going on about being sad. It's literally his name. Lastly, Tristan's third skill is Critique to the King, referring to the moment when it is said that, when leaving King Arthur's court, Tristan reportedly said that the king doesn't understand the human heart, or something to that effect. The translation varies. It was intended to be Tristan expressing his sadness about Arturia having to be so detached from her own humanity, but Arturia and everyone else took those words at face value, that Tristan was saying the king didn't understand people's feelings. and that this was the spark for the eventual fall of Camelot as people began to question how good of a king Arturia really was. This goes all the way back to Fate Zero, when Arturia mentions a knight having said this, though Tristan is not named here. It is only in FGO that it is explicitly revealed that this knight was Tristan. Tristan deeply regrets having said these words, especially since they were taken differently from how he had intended. But did Tristan actually say this in the legends? Well, he did say something like it, but not about King Arthur. Rather, he said it about his uncle, King Mark, about Mark's increasingly bitter behavior regarding Tristan and Isolde's relationship. Nor did Tristan explicitly leave the Round Table. It's more like he wandered off during the Grail quest and ended up getting killed. I'll get into more detail later. Suffice to say, this skill, and all of the characterization that comes out of it, is a fail. Tristan's noble phantasm is Fail Not, whereupon he traps an enemy in multiple wires, then fires one deadly arrow to strike them down. So this one tripped me up a bit. You might think that Fail Not, or Fail Not, is the name of Tristan's bow, and in some versions of the legend, that is the case. But in other stories, it seems to refer to his skill with a bow, a technique, or him creating an elaborate trap for his enemies rather than the name of the weapon itself. You might have noticed this already, but there's a headache-inducing amount of variation in Tristan's legend. Some general bits stay true no matter what, but details often shift around. The name Fail Not dates all the way back to at least the 12th century works of the Breton poet Béraud. In his work, Tristan's bow was called L'arc qui ne fail, or the bow that does not fail, something like that. Over time, this bow, or technique, or trap, whatever it is, it got the name Fail Not before shifting to the modern form Fail Not. The fact that Tristan never misses with his bow is also the likely reason why he keeps his eyes closed all the time. He doesn't need to see his target because he's gonna hit it no matter what. While Fate's version of Tristan's bow is rather unique by making it both a bow and a harp, and how he isn't shooting arrows but rather string or sonic bursts, there is little denying that Fail Not is an excellent MP choice for Tristan. Tristan's craft essence is But I Lied Once, depicting a sailing ship with white sails. This refers to another ending of Tristan's story found in the works of Thomas of Britain, and is the one Fate chose to use for Tristan. While trying to rescue a lady in Brittany, Tristan is wounded, again with a poisoned spear. Having tried other remedies and failed, he asks a friend to sail to Britain and seek the help of Isolde, who is a very capable healer. He asks this friend to have white sails on his ship if he is returning with Isolde, but black sails if he is not. The thing is, Tristan is not alone waiting. His wife is with him, a wife who is also named Isolde, or Isolde of the White Hands. Yes, this is deliberate. Tristan married someone else named Isolde in the hope that it might make him forget about the other Isolde. But of course it didn't, and so wife Isolde found herself neglected by a husband who didn't love her. Wife Isolde decided to take this opportunity to take revenge. When the friend's ship was returning, she told Tristan that the sails were black, that the other Isolde wasn't coming to save him. Having lost this final hope, Tristan died right there. Of course, the sails were actually white, but it was too late for the first Isolde to save him, and she herself died upon seeing Tristan's corpse. In the Sea's text, Tristan remembers this moment, thinking about how he was always hurting other people, particularly his wife, and decides that he doesn't blame her for doing that he didn't deserve to be rescued since he was an unfaithful husband. Needless to say, the Sea's link to Tristan's legend is absolutely solid, and its themes get further explored in his interlude. Tristan's Valentine Sea is Tristan's Greatest Hits, depicting a CD case featuring Tristan on the cover. He doesn't actually want to give the protagonist this as a return gift, but they swipe it upon seeing it. It is a recording of music and a collection of pictures done by Da Vinci while she, Tristan, and Lancelot were all massively drunk. I've already talked about Tristan's talent for playing the harp, so we already know that this works. This is a fun little Valentine Sea. Now for characterization, starting with a look into the legends surrounding Tristan. Similar to Merlin, Tristan originally had his own separate tale long before he was brought into Arthurian legend, and can actually easily stand alone without any connection to King Arthur. It's not entirely clear when Tristan first appeared in legends, with a stone pillar in Cornwall suggesting that he might go all the way back to the 6th century. The story may also have its roots in an older but very similar tale found in Irish mythology. that of Diarmuid, who we will revisit another time. Vanishing for a few centuries, Tristan's tale resurfaced during the 12th century via the works of two poets, Thomas of Britain and Bérault. A century later we would get the prose Tristan, which expanded the story further and linked Tristan to Arthurian legend, making him a Knight of the Round Table. Malory would condense the prose Tristan and make it part of Le Morte d'Arthur in the 15th century. As I mentioned earlier, despite this Arthurian connection, Tristan could and did continue to have his own story told separately, notably by Richard Wagner in the 19th century. He has had many names over the centuries: Tristan, Tristram, Tristain, Trustanus, and more. I could keep going, but I think you get the point. Tristan's legend has been told and retold a bunch of times, each version having its own little changes. For the purposes of this video, I'll mainly be sticking to Malory, as I've done with other characters from Arthurian legend. Since I already talked about the tragic circumstances of his birth while talking about his second skill, I'm going to skip past that. After the death of Tristan's mother, he was eventually reunited with his father Melodius, who had since remarried. It wasn't entirely a painless experience. His new stepmother actually tried to poison Tristan at one point, and only him asking for mercy prevented his father from burning her alive. I've never had a step-parent. I've heard stories, but it isn't usually that bad, right? Anyway, Tristan grew up and became highly skilled as both a warrior and musician. After coming of age, he was knighted by his uncle King Mark and fought as his champion in a duel, defeating Sir Marhaus but getting wounded in the process. This wound was poisoned though, and so Tristan went off to Ireland to be healed by the daughter of the Irish king, a woman named Isolde, or Isolde depending upon the version. While there, he would also meet Sir Palomides, another future Round Table knight, and a future rival to Tristan due to his own unrequited love for Isolde. Tristan would soon return to Cornwall, but it would not be long before circumstances would bring him and Isolde together again. Because you see, King Mark was looking for a bride, and Isolde, as the daughter of another king, was a pretty good choice. Tristan was sent to escort Isolde from Ireland back to Cornwall, but while on the journey home, the two would end up unwittingly consuming a love potion, making the pair fall madly in love with each other, which is a bit of a problem since Tristan is literally taking Isolde home to marry his uncle, King Mark. This sets the stage for the core conflicts each character has within them. Tristan and Isolde want to stay loyal to King Mark, but love each other. King Mark likes Tristan, but obviously has a problem with Tristan's interest in his wife. The early versions of King Mark, at least. Later on, he turns into a complete jackass with basically no redeeming qualities. King Mark catches the pair chatting privately, gets angry, and then Tristan tries to make it up to King Mark by humiliating other knights in a joust. Of course, one of the knights Tristan humiliated was Sir Lamorak, Knight of the Round Table, and son of King Pellinore, and he decided to get a little payback. Sir Lamorak came across a knight carrying a magic horn to drink water from, with the magical part being that the horn would spill if it was drunk by a woman who was unfaithful to her husband. This horn was a creation of Morgan Le Fae, and it was being taken to Camelot in order to humiliate Guinevere. But Sir Lamorak had it taken to Cornwall instead, where most of the court's ladies failed the test. Needless to say, King Mark was less than pleased. After escaping his uncle's men after being caught in bed with Isolde, Tristan was exiled and left for Brittany, where he found and married another woman named Isolde, Isolde of the White Hands. The first Isolde was upset at first, but as I mentioned earlier, Tristan only really did this to try to keep himself from getting into more trouble with King Mark. He never consummated his marriage with Isolde of the White Hands. And as also mentioned before, Tristan's neglect of his wife Isolde ultimately would lead to his death. After spending some time in Brittany, Tristan and wife Isolde are summoned to visit the first Isolde, but after the ship was thrown off course and Tristan left the ship to seek out adventure, he ends up saving someone from a sorceress, a certain nobody named King Arthur. Tristan did not identify himself just yet, continuing to wander the land, get into fights, and ultimately ended up at a jousting tournament at the Castle of Maidens. Now, if there is one thing that Tristan's storyline is absolutely full of, it's jousting tournaments. I'm only going to gloss over them though. It's not too relevant for our story. Lancelot is the ultimate winner of this first tournament, having defeated Tristan. But Lancelot offers his reward to Tristan, impressed by his skill. But Tristan wasn't there to collect, having been grabbed by Morgan Le Fae, who was looking to play another game. At the next jousting tournament, Tristan would remain incognito, but would carry a shield subtly hinting at Lancelot's affair with Guinevere, another attempt by Morgan to embarrass her hated rival, much like the magic horn earlier. But also like that first game, this didn't amount to much. Tristan won a few jousts, including against King Arthur, but then left, seeking out the man who had defeated him before, Lancelot. Tristan did not find Lancelot, but Sir Palamedes, his rival for the affections of Isolde. Palamedes had been injured, and so he and Tristan decided to meet for a duel in 2 weeks to settle things. When that moment arrived, however, Tristan ended up fighting someone else, another knight hiding their identity who was far deadlier than Sir Palamedes. After fighting each other to a standstill, they eventually realized who this duel was actually between, Tristan on one side and Lancelot on the other. Impressed by the fact that Tristan fought him to a draw, Lancelot then took Tristan to Camelot, where he was made a Knight of the Round Table. Meanwhile, King Mark had been hearing about Tristan making a name for himself, and decided to go to Camelot in disguise in order to pick a fight. As you can probably guess, this turned out to be a very bad idea. King Mark was repeatedly embarrassed, was forced to end Tristan's exile so that he could see Isolde again, and that Lancelot would kill King Mark if he tried to harm Tristan again. What follows from here are more shenanigans, Mark getting pissed off, and, of course, more tournaments. Again, I'm not going to do a play-by-play of all the matches and who won each of them. Tristan didn't even participate in all of them anyway. I will note, however, that it is during one of these tournaments that Sir Lamorak embarrasses the Orkney brothers, reigniting the old feud and eventually leading to the murders of both Morgause and Sir Lamorak. I should also quickly mention another character, Sir Dinadan, a close friend of Tristan who helps in the aforementioned shenanigans, like sending a bard to King Mark's court to make fun of him. Sir Dinadan is basically a jokester character who likes to make fun of people. Not a jester, just a guy who likes to mock others. But Sir Dinadan's tendency to make fun of people ultimately gets him murdered when he ends up teasing people who don't like to be mocked, Agravain and Mordred. Eventually, King Mark hosted his own tournament, hoping to lure Tristan to take part and arrange for an accident during the joust to get Tristan killed. But Tristan beat King Mark's agent, so Mark snatched Tristan and threw him in a dungeon. Tristan was broken out of jail by fellow Round Table knight Percival, and both he and Isolde fled, taking up residence in Lancelot's castle, Joyeuse Garde. There the two of them would remain, Tristan either ignoring or leaving the Grail quest, and he more or less drops out of the story, at least until Tristan gets wounded by a poisoned spear while trying to save a lady being attacked by a group of knights, which was supposed to be a random encounter, but it sounds really suspicious, possibly a ruse set up by King Mark to get rid of Tristan once and for all. What follows after that are the events described in Tristan's craft essence. He waits, deathly ill, for the first Isolde to arrive and heal the poison, but his wife Isolde finally takes her revenge, crushing his hopes and letting him die just before the first Isolde arrives, with first Isolde dying of grief shortly afterwards. This of course is only one version of Tristan's legend. There are so many variations that it made this video way more difficult than it should have been. The gist is, Tristan fell in love with his uncle's bride, and it ultimately led to their deaths. A tale of tragic romance that has been told, retold, and altered countless times throughout history. Shifting over to the Fate franchise, we first meet Tristan in the Camelot Singularity, where he serves as one of the Knights of the Lion King. Our first impression of Tristan is an ugly one, with him not only straight up massacring civilians, but even his own allies for the crime of wanting to mourn their own dead. It certainly didn't help that he wouldn't shut up about how sad he was feeling, which really rang hollow when he was the one causing so much misery to those around him. This actually was probably one of the few narrative mistakes the Camelot Singularity made, since at least with the other knights who served the Lion King, Gawain, Lancelot, and Mordred, these are characters people had the opportunity to meet before in other Fate stories, whereas the first impression we get of Tristan is as an unambiguously terrible person. Later we learn what's going on, that Tristan's entire personality has been flipped thanks to receiving the gift Reversal. Tristan understood the Lion King's actions, but knew that following them would be too much to bear, and so Tristan asked for this gift to turn himself into a beast. It doesn't just affect his personality, it also makes him immune to poison, which would otherwise be a famous weakness of his, something that the Hassans find out the hard way during their battle against Tristan. Cursed Arm still manages to defeat Tristan by unleashing his arm, a demon, but it's a very narrow victory. While Tristan came off as a complete jerk in Camelot and lacked the narrative depth that Gawain, Mordred, and Bedivere had, at least he was a deadly opponent worthy of his name. Tristan's reversal in Camelot has affected his characterization ever since, not only because it was the first impression many players got of him, but because of how it affects Tristan after he comes to Chaldea. In his interlude, Tristan faces something like a double identity crisis. First, it occurs to him that, of the two Isoldes in his life, one of them he loved only after drinking that love potion, and the other he didn't love despite having married her. This makes him wonder if, in fact, he is incapable of true love, leading him to think that, maybe, his reverse self in Camelot is what he's really like, a monster who is only good for killing. After knocking some sense into him, Tristan concludes that it wasn't that he was incapable of love, but that he had lacked courage, that he feared losing what he had, and so didn't try to fix the mess he made for himself. He didn't try to actually build a relationship with Isolde of the White Hands, the one he actually married, which led to her becoming bitter and ultimately got Tristan killed. Tristan's guilt and discomfort with his reverse self from Camelot comes up a few more times, notably in Lost Belt 6, which likely played a part in him deciding to go out of his way to be a hero rather than the villain. He quickly bonds with Arturia Castor, reassures her of her identity, her potential for greatness, and ultimately sacrifices himself so that she, Da Vinci, and the protagonist can escape from Fairy Knight Gawain, Barkest. Tristan didn't get much screen time in that sprawling epic of a story, but it was still memorable, and he gave Arturia Castor the push she needed to begin her pilgrimage in earnest. Another story that Tristan had a brief but notable appearance in is in the Epic of Remnant main interlude, Seraph. He's actually not part of Chaldea's team here, but a servant who had been summoned to Seraphix as part of its Grail War. Tristan finds himself in a place gone mad, where pretty much everyone is trying to kill him or has gone insane, often both of those things. Little wonder that he is suspicious and hostile when first meeting the protagonist, Gawain and Melt. It is only after being defeated and shown mercy that he ends up becoming an ally, even if he spends much of his screen time standing guard at the church. Tristan continues to distrust Melt and the other alter egos, and yet he ultimately ends up sacrificing himself to rescue Melt from Sessioane Chiara. BB muses that it might be because Melt reminded Tristan of Isolde in some way, but another explanation is that he likely realized just how much Melt had gone through to stop Chiara, and so decided to rescue her. That's just my thinking on it. Aside from these three major story appearances, Tristan regularly appears in events whenever other Roundtable Knights appear. He shows up in Summer 4 as one of the Aloha Knights, and is defeated when Moriarty exploits Tristan's weakness for married women. Unlike with Lancelot though, whose reputation for womanizing is overblown in Fate, it's not wrong to say this about Tristan. One part of his backstory I couldn't fit is that Isolde wasn't the only time Tristan had relations with someone else's wife. When he was setting out to Ireland to have his poisoned wound healed, which ended up being his first meeting with Isolde, he actually met and had an affair with the wife of another knight, Sir Seguarides. Naturally, this knight wasn't very happy about this, starting a fight that Tristan ended up winning. Seguarides would eventually forgive Tristan, became a Roundtable Knight, and would eventually be one of the 24 knights Lancelot killed during his rescue of Guinevere. In other words, while his romance with Isolde is by far the most well-known part of his legend, Tristan wasn't exclusive to her in the same way that Lancelot was exclusive to Guinevere. And so it isn't unfair for Fate to do a comedy bit suggesting Tristan has a thing for married women. I don't like that aspect of Tristan, but that's my personal disapproval. It's not something that will affect his grade. And now for the verdict. What grade would I give Tristan's depiction in Fate Grand Order? Well, his character design and skill set are mostly good, showcasing Tristan's skill as a knight, his talent with a harp, and how deadly he is with a bow. While it is screwy to mix a bow and a harp together, it at least is both a unique design choice as well as highlighting two things Tristan is famous for. The biggest flaw in Tristan's skill set, and by extension his characterization, is how big of a deal they make out of Tristan supposedly saying that King Arthur doesn't understand the human heart. It might be something he actually said, but about his uncle King Mark rather than King Arthur. Though I guess it also does make sense for him to say that about Fate's version of King Arthur. My other criticism of Tristan's depiction is that, for how central she is to his story, Isolde barely comes up in Fate, only really popping in for his craft essence, his interlude, and a few lines here and there. The Tristan we get is a melancholy knight of supreme skill, but these traits are secondary in comparison to his romance with Isolde, which really ought to be at the core of his character. The impression given by Fade is that Tristan was better known as a Round Table knight, when in reality that was something that was only added to his legend later on. And if we are being honest, Tristan's presence in Arthurian legend is kind of forgettable. There's a reason why he hasn't come up much in my previous videos. He just doesn't have many connections to the other knights. Fade actually makes him a bigger deal among the Round Table than he normally is. So while the changes to Tristan keep him from getting a top grade, his depiction is by no means bad. As a whole, it's actually fairly decent. And so for a final grade, I am going to give Tristan, the Knight of Lamentation, a B. If you would like to learn more about a Fate depiction that completely dropped the ball and forgot about the thing they were most famous for, check out my video on Mephistopheles here. Until next time,